Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to the Virginia Senate District 37 Candidate Forum. I am your moderator, Deborah Woolen. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question and 1 minute for rebuttal if needed. Our panelists are Senator Chap Petersen, candidate Erika Yalowitz, and candidate Salim. At this time, we will begin with each candidate providing a brief introduction.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everybody, and good evening to my fellow candidates. My name is Chap Petersen. I am the Virginia State Senator currently in office, and I am a father and a small business owner. I grew up in Fairfax City, Virginia. I live there now with my wife. We've had 4 children that have gone through the local public school system. And 16 years ago, I had the great honor of being elected Virginia State Senator. Prior to that, I was a Fairfax City councilman and also a Virginia State delegate. As a state senator, I've had many honors and accolades, and I've had a chance to represent people in this area, which has been a great benefit. The last 4 years have been particularly impactful. As you know, we went through the COVID-19 pandemic. We had a shutdown of the public school system, which had an enormous impact on our children. And one of the major issues I worked on was reopening the schools and leading that fight and then bringing the children back to normal last year. And that's something I'm very proud of, the work that we did. Coextensive with that would also raising teacher pay. I think we all realize that teachers need to be compensated at the level of professionals, and last year we had a 10% across-the-board teacher pay raise. Currently I'm working on a 2% add-on to that, which I'm faced with opposition from the current governor, but we expect to get that done later this summer. I also serve as the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. In Virginia, we've made enormous strides in the environmental movement. We passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which for the first time allowed Virginia to actually tax emissions that come from carbon-producing power plants. So I'm very proud of that. I also had the legislation that for the first time taxed plastic bags, which otherwise would have ended up in the Chesapeake Bay. I'm running for re-election. This will be my 5th term if I'm re-elected. I have 2 worthy opponents. I'm very honored that they've stepped forward, and we're going to have a robust dialogue. And I look forward to answering your questions and learning more. And I'm going to pass it along to Erika, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you, Deborah. My name is Erika Yalowitz. I am a first-generation American. My parents separated when I was a child. I was raised under the care of a single father, a small business owner in Bogota, Colombia, where a depressed economy was defined by the war on drugs and civil war. In my birth country, I learned that nothing can be taken for granted. I overcame the odds to be here before you. I am a Latina, a mother of an FCPS student, and an active labor union member. I have lived the American dream, and I've spent the last 16 years working to ensure the American dream is available to everyone in our community. This is a Democratic primary, and as Democrats, we need to reckon with a reality. Republicans hold all statewide offices and control the House of Delegates, and we have a narrow majority in the Senate, where Mr. Petersen has broken party lines to vote with the Republicans on often harmful issues like guns, charter schools, and limiting reproductive rights. This is unacceptable. Our country has lost 50 years of work on reproductive freedom. Women and all allies who stand with us have an obligation to fight for our rights in Virginia. Right now, only 20% of our state senators are women, and Virginia has yet to elect a Hispanic state senator. Today, I am humbly asking you to cast your vote for a historic and decisive change on or before June 20th, and it would be an honor to represent you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for having me on today. My name is Salim, and I'm also running for State Senate District 37th. And, over the last couple of years, I have been well involved with the Democratic Party, along with just getting involved with the community. But my story goes back to when I was a 7-year-old boy in Bangladesh. We went through a drought followed by a flood, and that was when my dad decided he needed to do better. He needed to bring his kids to a place where they can live and they can get educated, they can have a bright future. That's when he decided to bring his kids to America. The summer of 2000, we landed in America. We got to Washington, D.C. That was the best summer that I could possibly think of. And that was the moment where, as soon as the next summer came around, we became homeless. They sold the building that we lived in to be turned into luxury condos, and we, along with other families, were just homeless. From there, we were taken in by family and friends in Falls Church in Fairfax County, who took us in, let us live in their basements, let us live in their spare bedrooms. And from there, we found out about affordable housing from Fairfax County. That's where we received our first affordable housing unit, along with the fact that when they introduced us to affordable housing, that's when they introduced us to affordable health care, and that's where my mom found out that she needed life-saving surgery. As a result of that, I stayed back, went through our community colleges, and went through George Mason University and got my education. The reason I tell this to people is that these are policies that Democrats have been fighting for, and we still fight for. Affordable housing, affordable health care, and affordable education. I have been through all that, and that is what I'm trying to provide in this election.
Thank you so much, candidates. We will now begin with the question portion of the evening. Education is fast becoming one of the most controversial topics today. Virginia residents are increasingly concerned about how policy will affect our education system, from disciplinary measures to standards of learning. A House bill sponsored by Republican House Senator Glenn Davis prohibits governors' schools from using race as a factor in the admissions process. Due to systemic inequalities and inequities, students from marginalized socioeconomic backgrounds often face barriers to education available at some of Virginia's most prestigious schools. Should the state, and this is the question for the candidates, for the panelists, should the state implement policies that ensure equal access to high-quality education offered at prestigious institutions to students of various races and socioeconomic backgrounds? Senator Petersen.
I'll be happy to answer that. And thank you. First of all, I'm very familiar with the bill that was sponsored by Delegate Davis, and I do agree that race should not be used as a factor for an individual student. Obviously, it's part of the greater social background that all children participate in. The way we rewrote the bill was to put a focus on K through 3 education and make sure all students have the ability to be pulled out and given a chance for higher education and better education opportunities when they're in that vulnerable age between ages, say, 6 through 9, when some students get more opportunities than others, mostly because of socioeconomic background. And I think that's the way that you tackle the problem. I think if you do divide students based on race, I think that inevitably that will lead to repercussions and recriminations. But I think there's different ways to get at the issue. Giving more opportunities at a young age is certainly probably the best. The other way to get at this issue of making, for example, the school TJ more diverse is to say that the top student from, say, every middle school in the county should get in. In other words, make it more geographic oriented than it is right now. So, for example, if you have children that are in Route 1 or schools that are not typically accessing to TJ, they would have that opportunity. So the short answer to the question is yes. Putting more resources in really K through 3 education, giving kids a head start across the board, so regardless of socioeconomic background, they do get pulled up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
Absolutely. So Senator Petersen said that race should not be a factor. However, I believe that this misses a big point. People of color disproportionately live and attend underserved communities and underserved schools or lower income schools. I believe there is merit in finding equal access and allowing race to be a factor so that we can make sure every child has the opportunity to access an excellent school, regardless of their race, regardless of where they live, or where they can have that, that area of privilege of an excellent school to attend. I believe that we need to start leveling the field in the schools so that all children can access great education, and race is part of the problem. Race is part of the equation.
Thank you. Candidate Salim.
Thank you. That's a very good question. As somebody who has gone to Fairfax County Public School System, along with the community colleges that are in our state, and then of course gone on to being at George Mason University, I have not only benefited from our great school system, but also with the recent fight over at the national level and of course at the state level, it's always has been about making sure there's equal access, folks get the access they deserve. And, we had a lot of policy changes over the years. What that allowed is it allowed communities of color to get the same access as any other communities out there. We saw over the years, and I think, specifically Fairfax County Public School, when they changed their policies, an increase in admissions from other communities as well. And that is what it's about. It's about making sure everyone has the same access regardless of their background, regardless of their socioeconomic background. That is what it's all about. But at the same time, we have had folks from outside of, out of our areas who have continuously attacked our public education system. We even had, some of our senators who have attacked it, calling, during the COVID era that our school systems are worse than the Jim Crow era. And that is not what it is. I have been a benefit of our school system, and I can tell you, our school systems need the funding that they deserve. They don't need funding where it's contingent on localities coming up with the differences. They need funding for not only just programs, they need funding for teachers, they need funding for staff. Right now, the national average when it comes to teacher pay, it's very low, and you cannot live in an area like this while being a teacher, and that's where we need to allow localities to make decisions. The state needs to fund public school system, needs to allow localities to make those decisions on their own on how that best fits their communities.
Thank you, Candidate Salim. The next question, question number 2. The Virginia Department of Education came under fire, the Virginia Department of Education came under fire recently, when it released its 2022 model policies regarding the treatment of transgender students. The new policies touched on issues and restrictions surrounding bathroom access, pronouns, and extracurricular activities. Here's the question for the panelists. How should Virginia lawmakers approach policy regarding transgender students? Senator Petersen.
You want me to start every time?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, for now, this round.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the question, and this has clearly become a topic that, let's say, we didn't have 10 years ago, and now it seems like we have it, sitting on the House, on the Senate Education Committee. We probably had a half dozen Republican bills that came over from the House, all of which we defeated. But I think you have to draw a line in the sand, and this is the line in the sand. At the state level, we fund the public schools. We also set the standards of learning. We set the standards of quality. We set basically the list of subjects that children are going to learn, and we fund those, and we make sure that there is a minimum standard of education that's going to happen in the classroom. We also have local bodies called school boards, and they're elected at large, and they decide basically a lot of the policy that occurs within the classroom. And for example, how students are going to be treated within the classroom, how principals are going to organize the classroom, they're going to organize that. In terms of high school sports, this has been a very tense subject, and we have an organization called Virginia High School League, and my son played sports, I played sports, and the bottom line is we allow them to regulate those activities. So the bottom line is we need to make sure all children are treated with respect. That's number one. And whether that child is transgender or whether it's not, whether it's gay or lesbian or whether it's not, the bottom line is all children matter, all children have value, and we need to make sure that they're treated with respect. In terms of the actual sort of daily mechanics of a classroom, that's really something for the principal and the teacher to operate. I think when the legislature tries to micromanage that, they almost always make mistakes. And so the bottom line is that most of those issues we would defer to the school board, again, keeping in mind that all children matter and all children are entitled to respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
Thank you for the question.
Sure.
If we are not allowed if we should not discriminate children or anyone under the basis of race, religion, nationality, why would we discriminate children based on their sexual identity? I believe that children should be able to access the bathrooms where they belong, where they believe or they're identified with. That is, I believe that is very basic. It's, you know, it's an identity issue, and discrimination on this area is just unacceptable, especially against kids. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't go along with every other value that we preach and that we want to follow, that we want to implement, and we want to lead with in the school system.
Thank you. Candidate Salim.
Thank you for that question. As many of you know, if you haven't already, the former Secretary of Education, Atif Karni, has endorsed my campaign. And, he's somebody who has worked in the state's transgender policy when it came to education. And when I talked to him about all this, to ensure that I understood and to make sure that policies regarding transgender students are protected, along with the fact that regardless of who you are, when you're in the school system, school should be a safe place. That is what it comes out to. As somebody who has gone through public school, did not speak a single word of English, learned everything, school was the safest place I could ever be in. So that's why, I think when it comes to setting policies, we need to think about almost everyone that's at the school, not just thinking about, who's going to be on local school boards, who's going to be elsewhere, who's going to be at the board of visitors. We need to ensure that not only do we protect their rights, we protect all the rights across the board. And again, as a result of that, schools have to be a safe place. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so our next question, sorry.
Rebuttal.
You would like a rebuttal, okay?
So the issue is that we can also allow gender-neutral bathrooms. There is not always a black and white solution to everything, and there is the option to have gender-neutral bathrooms as well for children. It's just it's unacceptable for me to believe that this bill is being considered to discriminate against our LGBTQ students.
Okay, thank you. The next topic that we will discuss is gun control. Gun stats for Virginia. According to everystat.org, a branch of Everytown for gun safety, Virginia has the 36th highest rate of gun deaths in the U.S. 81% of homicides in Virginia involve a gun. According to Giffords.com, Virginia received a scorecard grade of a B, citing areas of improvement including gun owner licensing, waiting periods, and large capacity magazine bans. So here's the question for the panelists. As a legislator, what will you do to enact stronger gun control laws in Virginia? Starting with candidate Salim.
Thank you for that question. First, I would like to make it clear that I will do everything in my power and ability to ban assault weapons. That is what we're going to have to do. Yesterday was the 16-year anniversary of the tragic incident and the shooting at Virginia Tech. When that happened, I was in high school. That was my first, incident that I have learned about when it came to gun violence, and I didn't think it was going to get worse after that. Nope. It got worse. We have more gun violence, we have more active shootings than we have ever had before in our state, across the country, than any other nation. And, it always goes back to assault weapons. We as a state, we need to ban assault weapons. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have to look at what other states have done. There's about 13 states, and I believe plus the District of Columbia, that have banned assault weapons. So we need to look at what worked for them and what didn't and use that and say, hey, we're going to institute something different here that's going to ensure that we prevent gun violence, we make our public places safe. And here's the thing. Right now, when I went to public school and when I go to places, when I was in elementary school and in high school, all we did was a fire drill. Right now, kids across our Commonwealth, they may be in kindergarten or they may be in our public school system, they're going to have to do active shooter drills. That is not something that I believe kids should go through. So again, given if I'm elected, the first thing I'm going to do is attempt and make sure that we ban assault weapons.
Thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
I believe that gun violence is a horrible epidemic. And unfortunately, as Americans, we have been told to live with it. And I believe it's not our only option. As a court officer in juvenile court, sometimes I see weapons in schools or weapons in the community that don't belong here. Many of these weapons have been lost and stolen weapons or ghost guns that, unfortunately, Senator Petersen has voted against reporting, for example, lost and stolen weapons in the past. This is, guns have to have checks, have to have age limits for access, for purchase. I see ghost guns in the hands of kids. They order parts online and they put them together. We need age limits and locks to prevent that from happening. In the same way, we need universal checks. We need accountability for gun owners with children at home. We need to make sure we develop a culture of safety around guns. This is very important, especially with every other piece of news that we see in the country when there is yet another mass shooting, or even individual victims of violence, or even suicides. We cannot make it easier for people to have guns, to use guns, to bring guns into our communities. It's an imperative for me. I believe Senator Petersen, I also work with victims of domestic violence, and this is very personal as well. Senator Petersen in the past has voted against the time limits when an offender can get their gun back. That is important. We need to make sure that victims of domestic violence are also protected when there's a protective order, when there have been guns around the home, so that they cannot be accessed and we can protect their lives.
Okay. Thank you so much. Senator Petersen.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate my colleagues' comments. As you probably have noticed, if you're in the audience, I'm the one here with a voting record. So I've got votes you may agree with or votes you may disagree with. But let's talk a little bit about sort of the greater issue. Virginia, we passed some significant gun control measures in 2020 and 2021. We instituted a red flag law that's a model for the rest of the country. We instituted a bill on criminal background checks whenever you do a commercial transaction. We instituted a bill on one gun a month, which we had previously and was repealed by the Republicans. We instituted a bill allowing local control over ordinances so people couldn't carry guns in public in a way that might alarm or surprise other people. There's one thing I've done up here, and I think I'm the only person. I've actually represented people in criminal court. And every time you pass a gun control bill, it is under Title 18.2, which is the criminal code statute. And so it gives you the opportunity to prosecute people. And so you have to be very careful and very precise when you draw these laws that people will be prosecuted. Oftentimes they're people of color, since that is something that is going to be mentioned. And so I'm there to make sure that people are protected, that when laws are written, that they're written in a way that's precise, that's not overly broad. And we've had bills that, quite frankly, were very well intentioned, but at the end of the day, they were too broad and they needed to be rewritten, and we're here to make sure that they are precise. We have passed legislation to ban the sale of assault weapons. The larger issue is, what about those people that have existing assault weapons? There's probably 50,000, maybe 60,000 people that have firearms that they legally purchased. And what happens to them if, again, assault weapons are made illegal? Do they then become felons? We'd have to build multiple prisons to house them all. So it is an issue that has a lot of different aspects to it. We have an ongoing conversation. We'll have more legislation filed about it, and a lot will depend, of course, on whether or not we have a Democratic majority. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so with this next question, I'm going to ask each candidate to spend 1 minute answering this question. What can Virginia lawmakers do to mitigate the problem of gun violence amongst our youngest, especially in light of the recent shooting of a teacher by a 6-year-old, which has highlighted the increased need for gun violence prevention among our youth? Starting with candidate Yalowitz, 1 minute.
Gun laws, safety, accountability, age limits, making sure that we have set areas where guns are not allowed when children are around, making sure that guns are not allowed near schools, near places of worship, near the places where people gather, which are typically the places of preference when there are mass shootings. We need to make sure that we keep a close eye on people who have mental health challenges and access to guns. I know someone, everybody knows someone who owns a gun and has had mental challenges in their lives. I believe that we can protect people from themselves and protect society and protect children against these things.
Thank you. Candidate Salim.
With young people and what we saw in Virginia and other places across the nation, we need safe storage. We also need to make sure the parents are held accountable. Whoever's the gun owner, they're held accountable. I think we legitimately have a problem that we can solve if we work with all of our localities and other folks, as well as making sure A, safe storage, B, holding parents accountable and holding the gun owners accountable. And we can even go further to the point where when it comes to getting permits, we put in extensive testing for whoever wants to get any type of gun. And of course, educating them that guns should not be near where children are, or creating laws where if you have your guns versus your magazines, they need to be at different places compared to where they're at right now, where kids just go there and just take it. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Before we have Senator Petersen answer that question, I don't want you to get cut off. So when we come back from our break, I will make sure that Senator Chap Petersen gets an opportunity to answer that question. Please make sure you don't go anywhere. Come right back and join us for Senate District 37 Candidate Forum. We will continue with questions on reproductive rights. Let's see, what else do we have here? Reproductive rights and criminal justice reform and affordable housing. Thank you so much for joining us for Inside Scoop. Don't go anywhere. Come back as we continue our conversation with Senator Petersen, candidate Yalowitz, and candidate Salim. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you soon.
Caitlin, be serious. Now take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
You're not the kind of guy that makes the girls all sad.
2 for $3.
They never turn their heads and look when you walk by. 'Cause it's the little things.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Helping.
What a nice young man.
Pass it on.
My goodness.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
I better get out of here. Ooh.
Get it.
Get it.
Get it.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home
brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill, bring good home.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Much for joining us on Inside Scoop for the Candidate Forum for Senate District 37. We are joined by panelists Senator Chap Petersen, candidate Erika Yalowitz, and candidate Saddam Salim. So we left off our previous segment with one more question on gun violence, gun reform.
I remember the question.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just for our audience, what can Virginia lawmakers do to mitigate the problem of gun violence among our youngest residents?
Thank you, Deborah. And
Sure.
I think my colleagues touched on a couple points. And actually, we do have laws on the books. I mean, we have laws on the books prohibiting youth from accessing a weapon without adult supervision. That law is already on the books, and we've had discussions about whether to move that number from 14 to 16 to 18. I can tell you that under no circumstance would allowing a 6-year-old to have a firearm be considered legal in Virginia. But here's the larger issue, and that is, what do we do about manufacturers and distributors that are marketing to children? I mean, now that we have the internet, people have the ability to order things online with minimal verification. And how do we hold them liable if they advertise to children or sell weapons to children? I actually had a bill creating a manufacturing liability and a cause of action against manufacturers that allowed their products to be sold to children. It passed the Senate. It died in the House. But I think that's the type of legislation that would really put some teeth into liability for those that create these weapons and then make them available to children who should not have them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator Petersen. Okay, so the next topic will be on reproductive rights. With the overturn of Roe v. Wade in 2022, Virginians are concerned now more than ever about reproductive health care and rights. So the question for the panelists is the Center of Disease Control the prompter. According to the Center of Disease Control, nationally, Black women are 3 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. In Virginia, Black women are 52% more likely to experience a preterm birth. What contributes to these disparities, and what policies would you support to mitigate them? So there's a 2-part question here, and we'll start with you, candidate Yalowitz. What contributes to these disparities, and what policies would you support to mitigate them?
Deborah, unfortunately, minority women and Black women have difficulty accessing care. Access to care is a key to have full developmental pregnancies, brought to term, but also, it's about health. It's about the service that women and people of color receive that is very different, unfortunately, for biases in the medical systems. I believe that it's important to address those biases, to make sure that women, regardless their race, ability to pay, origin, nationality, can access equal care. And that can make every decision on reproductive freedom, reproductive rights, based on that access to care. If a woman doesn't have insurance, if a woman doesn't have the ability to make decisions over her own reproductive health, it will be a challenge to address any difficulties during pregnancy. So we need to equal the field in the medical area as well, to make sure that all women are treated equally in the system. I believe we all have a story, or we all know a woman who has a story that comes from a disparity in the medical system, or a bias, or we need to call it out, racism in the medical system as well. So immigrant women also experience some of the same challenges as well. So I believe that we need to make sure that laws favor everyone equally and can guarantee that equal treatment.
Thank you. Candidate Salim.
Thank you for that question. And with the way Roe v. Wade has been overturned, we're seeing across the nation a lot of states are rolling back reproductive rights, rolling back access. And when we do that, what happens with Black and Brown communities is that the maternal death rate increases. So because of the reduction in access, it increases that trend of women that are dying after birth, giving birth, or after a pregnancy. And what really, when I learned about all this, goes way, way back when my mother, giving birth in a third world country to 3 children, she had 0 aftercare. When we got to America, she always thought her abdominal pain was just something else. She just took a Tylenol or Advil until we found a clinic, a public clinic in Falls Church that sort of took her in and said, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at that. From there, she needed emergency surgery because that was life-threatening to her. And I cannot tell you enough how grateful I am to this day that because of public care, because of the access that she has had, because of the reproductive care that she received, that she's still alive today. And those are the things that's impacting the brown and Black communities, specifically access. And when it comes to our current legislature, when it comes to the Commonwealth, when it comes to the governor, they're just all trying to take away a lot of the rights when it comes to protecting reproductive care.
Okay. Senator Petersen.
Sure. Let me start with the positive. And I think if we look at the positive, we've done 2 major legislative changes in the last 2 decades, which have made a difference in the lives of children and women. One is we enacted the FAMOUS program 20 years ago, which basically recognized that children are a lot cheaper to insure. And by putting them in Medicaid, that we were able to get them treatment, get them services from the ages of, say, 3 through 12, when they're relatively cheap, and we can diagnose conditions, we can diagnose deafness, we can diagnose autism, we can diagnose all sorts of issues that we can deal with much more efficiently and much more effectively on the front end. And we did that 20 years ago. 10 years ago, or maybe it's more like 6 years ago, we expanded Medicaid. We enacted Medicaid expansion. We took 400,000 Virginians that had no health care, and we put them into the Medicaid program and rolled them into the Medicaid program. Now the question is, we can put people into Medicaid, but how do we make sure that that program is the same quality that you would have in private pay? And the question is, we have to improve reimbursement rates. We have to give doctors, physicians, nurses, what have you, the incentive to see all patients and treat all patients equally. And I'm not going to make any assumptions about what patients are going to go see which doctor, but the bottom line is, until we have a Medicaid program that approximates and equals the private pay program, we will still have these disparities. And that's why, as Democrats, we need to focus on public health funding. It really goes to our identity as a party, that every woman, every child ought to have basically the same standard of care as everybody else. I've been very fortunate. My mom gave birth to me and 2 sisters. I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife has had 4 deliveries. We've been very lucky. And I don't discount that one bit. But again, we need to make sure that the rising tide lifts all the boats as Democrats. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. This next question for the panelists, simple yes or no. We're going to start with candidate Salim. Currently, there are 3 states that protect a woman's right to an abortion within the respective state's constitution. If elected, would you support legislation that would seek to amend Virginia's constitution to include protection of reproductive rights? Yes or no? Candidate Salim.
Yes, I would include...
yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Candidate Yalowitz.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Petersen.
Yes, already have.
Okay. Next question. The next topic, will be criminal justice reform. In 2020, Virginia lawmakers passed a sweeping package of criminal justice reform bills aimed at making our legal system a more just and equitable space. First question for the panelists, starting with Senator Petersen. How should policymakers approach, as a policymaker, how would you approach prison reform issues such as solitary confinement, prison oversight, and rehabilitation services?
Okay. Before I answer this, can I give a shout out to Hampton University and Senator Mamie Locke, who was the patron of that criminal justice reform bill? I was a co-patron. I considered it one of the most effective pieces of legislation that we passed in Richmond. It dealt with everything from no-knock warrants to increasing the threshold for felony crimes to basically putting a limit on search warrants. And also having a standard on police conduct, lethal shootings, of course, we're going to get into that, I assume. But that was an incredibly important and impactful piece of legislation. You asked about sentencing reform. I had the bill this year, I had it the year before, called the Second Look legislation. It was Senate Bill, I believe it was 842, which passed the Senate with bipartisan support, and it died in the House. And that bill allowed those prisoners that were serving a long-term sentence and had served over 15 years and had not committed a homicide to petition the trial court for a second look at their sentence. And the reason is this: we don't have parole in Virginia. And because we don't have parole, those prisoners that have been sentenced to long-term sentences and have served, in many cases, the majority of their time, don't have an incentive to basically stay within the system, or they don't really have any hope. And the whole idea was to give them a chance to get back in front of the trial judge, to look at the circumstances of the crime, look at their conduct since they had been convicted, recognize the fact that they had served the bulk of their time, and potentially commute the sentence so they would get at least the 5, 6, 7 years off the back end. And it would have been completely within the discretion of the trial court. I do believe in the criminal system. I do believe when people commit crimes, especially felonies, it's appropriate oftentimes for them to serve time. But I also believe you need to temper that both with logic and with mercy. And again, I think the Second Look legislation is important. I worked very closely with the ACLU on it, and it's legislation I intend to bring back next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
Thank you. I believe solitary confinement should go away. It's a terrible measure that affects people negatively, incarcerated people in a very negative, very permanent way. It has permanent damage on mental health and on physical health. It's a very inhumane practice. So we should get rid of solitary confinement completely. I believe that in Virginia we also can work to eliminate or to reduce the opportunity of making prisons businesses. We cannot profit or allow people to profit from incarceration, because as long as we do that, we will have a system that brings more people to jails and prisons. Jails and prisons are not meant to be a revolving door for business. People cannot be treated as business that way in criminal justice. Rehabilitation is what I believe in. We need better policies that cater to rehabilitation, training, re-entry. That is the key. When people are incarcerated, their families suffer, the communities suffer, and they suffer when they re-entry to find viable jobs, to rebuild their lives. I believe we need to have an overhaul and a better management of criminal justice in Virginia, and we can do it. We just need the political will, and we just need to make sure that legislators don't receive money from these big businesses that profit from having people incarcerated and in jails and prisons.
Thank you. Candidate Salim.
Yep. So when it comes to solitary confinement, I do believe we need to get rid of that. And of course, our state right now, when it comes to prison oversight, it's not well regulated. It's not well. The oversight committee does not look at it the way other states do. So I do believe our legislature has an opportunity to ensure that there is more oversight when it comes to the prison system itself. And of course, rehabilitation in general, I do believe that people do need to be given a second chance, regardless of the crime that they have committed. And it's something that our system needs to look at. When it comes to rehabilitation, we need to put things in places that people can work towards, where in the communities, along with in our system right now, where since 2019, when we elected a lot of Commonwealth attorneys that are progressives, we have seen a lot of the policies, a lot of the things that have changed where it actually helped rehabilitate a lot of our prisoners. It also helped change the mentality of what that's going to look like. And, I bring this up because right now, we have our Commonwealth attorneys that are up for re-election. And what they have been doing over the last 4 years has been working. But we have a lot of groups out there. We have even, folks on our own side, even, as I say, Democrats, who are fighting against current Commonwealth attorneys to unseat them so that we go back to the old ways of doing things. We go to the old system of making sure we keep people in prison when the fact is we need to make sure we provide resources, we provide access for folks that are in there to get out, and of course to provide things outside of that so that people don't end up in prison.
Thank you. Okay, one more question on criminal justice reform. We will start with Senator Petersen.
Yep.
Okay. As law enforcement activity continues to come under scrutiny, there's an increased need for transparency. In April 2022, a bill, and I believe it's House Bill 734, was introduced that restricts public access to police files, potentially making it difficult to help exonerate innocent people. How should policymakers approach increasing transparency in law enforcement data and records?
Okay, well, this is an interesting issue because you can look at it two ways. You can look at it that a criminal defendant has a right to as much information as he can obtain to clear his name, and we do have a United States Supreme Court called Brady, where criminal defendants are entitled to any information that might help exonerate them or mitigate their damages. That already is the law; it's constitutional. But then you also have, to a certain amount, an extent of privacy for victims. And so someone who has, for example, been sexually assaulted may have an expectation of privacy in some parts of their medical records. So it's not just a question that whatever a criminal defense attorney wants to see, that they are automatically entitled to that. At the end of the day, if somebody is prosecuted, they are entitled to basically the full ability to defend themselves. And I hadn't planned on doing a Commonwealth attorney's race debate, but I'll tell you right now that there are Commonwealth attorneys in the United States that don't like to prosecute people, even those people that have molested children or abused their spouses. And, I do believe in criminal sentencing and criminal sentencing reform, but it's also important that when people commit crimes, especially against children, they need to be prosecuted. And I don't have a problem saying that's not inconsistent with being a Democrat. Part of being a Democrat is protecting those that can't protect themselves. So I do believe that criminal defendants have a constitutional right to defend themselves, but I also don't believe that it's sort of an unmitigated right, particularly the public, to go through people's private records, private sexual records, things of that nature. So it's a balance, like many things. Thanks.
Thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
So I believe that transparency is important. I do agree that, or I believe, as I work with courts and in ongoing investigations, we cannot, we need to make sure that ongoing investigations can be protected so that victims' information and the process of justice is served. However, I believe that transparency, and after the case has been closed, the information should be made available as long as personally identifying information for children, for victims of crime, and witnesses would be protected from disclosure. It's funny that Senator Petersen was talking about protecting children, and when in 2016 he voted against banning child marriage in Virginia, which was beyond my understanding. His opinion was that he was probably old school, but this was in the case of a 50-year-old male having relationships with 13-year-old girl that resulted pregnant from that abuse, and it was clearly abuse. The child was of non-consenting age. There was a clear statutory rape, and it should not have been overlooked. in the way it was. Fortunately, the age to marry for children or for minors was raised at that time, but what Senator Petersen just talked about was very inconsistent with that opinion in 2016.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Salim.
Yep. So I do believe in increasing transparency in law enforcement data and records, and of course, we can talk about transparency. We can talk about making those available, and of course, at the same time, protecting privacy laws and making sure data is protected at the same time. But when it comes to transparency, there's something else that people always forget is the accountability part. We have a lot of communities of color. There's a lot of police shooting that takes place, whether it's somebody that's allegedly took sunglasses and was shot. There is no real accountability when it comes to a lot of that, and I think that's something when we have to continuously fight on the progressive Democratic side and electing folks that will go and fight for that will go and fight for communities that really matter. And yes, transparency is 100% needed, but at the same time, there's the accountability part that's always missing, and it's like that's overlooked when it comes to police shootings, when it comes to just crime in general. We have to make sure that we have some type of accountability.
Okay, thank you. A rebuttal from anyone? No? Okay. So I'm going to ask the panelists to answer this next question on affordable housing with 30 seconds left. If elected, how do you plan to address Fairfax County's growing need for affordable housing? Starting with Senator Petersen.
Okay. 30 seconds or less. Well, I think the number one thing we can do is give more options to local government, whether it's creating affordable dwelling units, whether it's the ability to demand workforce housing. One of the things we did when I was a city councilman in Fairfax was we had a Renaissance Housing Corporation, which made no interest loans for people that were looking to fix up an old house. That's a way that you can buy an old Rambler and fix it up. One of the things we didn't talk about tonight is property taxes. The increase in property taxes taxing people out of their homes once they get to be over the age of Western retirement age. So affordable housing is not just an issue on the front end, but also on the back end. And I think that's about 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Yalowitz.
I believe, and that I agree with Senator Petersen, that we need to allow localities to increase their stock of affordable housing. And we need to allow localities to be flexible in building or allowing homeowners to include affordable housing in the way of alternative dwelling units, or the in-law suite that can be rented. Many people I have spoken with want to build something so that they can stay in place, age in place, while they rent a smaller unit in their home. It's a possibility, and I believe we can achieve it.
Okay, thank you.
Affordable housing is something that's near and dear to my heart as somebody who has benefited from that at the county level. My family waited about 2.5 years just to get a unit itself, and that's just the affordable rental. Right now, you look around the county, no one can really afford a home unless you're a millionaire. And what we need to really do is allow localities to look at the zoning restrictions, let them decide what zoning that they need to loosen up to ensure that there's multifamily housing, that there's dwellings that can be updated and all that. So again, affordable housing, the key to affordable housing is really building more housing, but allowing localities to figure out where those units need to go, along with making sure that the right people that need the affordable housing get them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now that was only 30 seconds, but I wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to give a proper closing.
I'll let them close first.
Okay, so we'll start with candidate Yalowitz for your closing. 1 minute each.
Thank you. Well, I hear from the community that voters want a dependable Democrat with leadership and experience to get things done. I am a tested Democrat you can trust in the Senate, and as a legislative advocate who has successfully promoted laws helping millions in Virginia, and as a court officer working directly on the application of the Virginia Code for the last decade, I am confident that I can offer the competence, values, and commitment that the constituents of the 37th District deserve. I have been a Democratic community leader years before my other primary opponent became involved. I've worked to increase Democratic turnout as a precinct captain, as a former candidate, and received the trust of more than 1,000 voters. I will ask for your vote of trust today.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Salim.
Again, this is Saddam Salim, running for State Senate District 37th. Again, I believe Virginia deserves a state senator who will be there for the community, who will be there for people. They need a leader that they can count on. They need a leader that they can count on 100% of the time, not 67% of the time, not 75% of the time when it's an election year, but somebody that they can count on. And somebody that will fight for reproductive rights, fight to prevent gun violence, fight for affordable housing and affordable education. A lot of people will, say those things, but they won't fight for it because it's an election year. But this is somebody who you can count on because I have been there. I have been through all those situations that really matter at the door. And over the last couple of, since I announced, I have knocked over 3,000 doors, 100 doors a day to make sure that I talk to constituents. And they really want a Democrat that listens to their issues and ensures that they are heard.
Okay. And Senator Petersen.
Thank you, and I want to thank my opponents for being here. And as you can tell, I'm the one with the elected record, so I take the shots, but that's okay because I know a lot of people out there, you've been taking the shots for the last few years, and I did some controversial things. I reopened the schools and put 1.2 million kids back in the classroom. That was my legislation. I allowed kids to go to school without a mask on. That was my bill. I took tremendous criticism for that. Ironically, I didn't get criticized tonight for that. I fought hard to reopen the state economy. I brought legislation to save small business tax relief. I kept hundreds of businesses from going out of business and filing bankruptcy. And I've had very strong support. I'm supported by the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Virginia Sheriff's Association, Majority Leader Dick Saslaw, who of course is retiring, Caucus Leader Mamie Locke, who's someone I respect greatly. But I'm not asking to vote for me because of that. I work hard. And let me tell you something. There's a person out there named Glenn Youngkin. That's the person that's going to be the obstacle to us. And I think we need to unify and keep that in mind. And I thank you all again for letting me speak.
Okay, thank you so much. Alrighty, so with a few seconds left, you all know this is my favorite part of the show, but before we do that, thank you so much for watching Inside Scoop. If you need more information on the candidates, if you're watching this on Thursday, please make sure you click the links below. Please make sure you visit their websites. So we're going to play a very quick lightning round version of Would You Rather. Okay, starting here, home fries or hash browns?
Home fries.
Hash browns?
Home fries.
Okay, tickets to the carnival or circus?
Carnival?
Carnival.
Circus.
Okay, and would you rather recite the alphabet backwards or name all 50 states?
All 50 states.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining us for Inside Scoop. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for watching our show.